Hello fellow woodworkers, welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop. Today we're going to be making a storage box for incense sticks. Roll the intro. So this video is going to be slightly different to the other videos I've made on the Garage Workshop. Before, you've seen me build bigger structures like my cabinet when I partition the cabbage or my wood storage unit. This week I'm going to be making something a bit more detailed and hopefully with a bit more finesse. So I'm going to be making an incense storage box for joss sticks. Now, I've got these offcuts of wood. I've got a very well-known coffee make American brand. I think you'll know who it is. And they've just built one just up the road from my house, and every day I've been going through and looking in the skip, and I found these 4 pieces of trim. I'm not entirely sure what's covering them. It's MDF. I think it's just vinyl covered MDF, but I thought they're really lovely pieces of wood and perfect for this project. So these are the 4 pieces that I've got. I'm going to top and tail them, but also I'm going to reduce the width. As you can see, they're quite wide and I'd like to have them a bit thinner than that. So I'm going to run them through the table saw to probably 2/3 of the thickness. But the offcut that I'm going to use is going to form the bottom of the box. I've got a rough idea in my mind of how I want it to look, but I haven't got a real plan, as it were. So the first thing to do is measure up these pieces of wood and run them through the table saw. Let's do that now. Okay, so the joss stick that I just measured is 26 centimeters long. This is generally the size they are, but I just want to make it with a little bit of space in it in case we do buy some bigger ones. Now, the pieces of wood that I've got have all been cut, as you can see, on a right angle, and I'm just going to measure and find out what the biggest size is we've got to the measurement. So I've got 37, well, they're all exactly 37. I've got 37 centimeters. So if I allow for the width that this wood is going to be, at the moment, the width of the wood is currently 18 mil. So I'm going to go down to probably 12 mil, I would say, for the size of the sides of the unit. So if I go down to 12 mil, that's going to give me some offcuts, and I'm going to use those offcuts to make the slide in the bottom of the drawer. So if I go down to 12 mil, that means it's going to be 12 mil each side, which means I need 24 mil off either end. So if they're 26 long, I've got to add 12 mil or 1.2, which is 2.4 to that. So just under 30 is going to give me enough. So just to be doubly sure, I'm going to mark them to 32, then I'll put them through the miter saw. Okay, so I've marked them all at 32. What I'm now going to do is set the miter saw up and put the stop block in for 32 centimeters. Okay, so I've made the cuts now on the miter saw. I'm going to be honest, a little bit rougher than I'd hoped. I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's a little bit of a tear out there and a little bit of a tear out on that one, just on the corner there. So I'm not too worried about that because both of those corners will end up being mitered off to join the box together. And I've also got 4 pieces here and I only need 2 for the sides. The other bits are going to be the end and the back, and I've got 2 pieces here that are completely unblemished. The good news is they're all exactly the same length. I set up a little bit of a piece of wood inside my mitre saw here just as a stop block, because my stop block wouldn't reach that far. So they're all the same size. Now what I'm going to do is put them through the table saw and reduce the thickness. And as I said, they're 18 mil. I think I'm going to go for 12 mil, but I've got to be very careful doing this because I don't want to rip and tear. So I'll set the table saw up, I'll mark it out to the correct width, and we'll run them through and see how they turn out. Okay, so I've set that to 12 mil. Going to bring the blade up nice and high because obviously this side is going through. Okay, so I've made the cuts. I'm going to be honest, a little bit of a varying degree of success. I don't know how it happened, but I've got one, I'm not sure if you can see that one, which is a lot lower at one end than it is the other. I'm not sure if it's easy to see that from there, but it goes to, well, we're under 5 on one and the other it's 5. But the other 3 pieces, all to me, look fairly uniform. They all look the same width and are hopefully, yeah, that's 6, which it should be. That's 6, which it should be. And that's 6. So I've got 3 of the pieces. Remember, I didn't need the 4th piece. I only needed 3. So I've got the 3 pieces that I need. They're 6 mil wide. The only thing that's now slightly worrying me is just perhaps I should have kept the pieces that are 12 mil on the outside edge, if you see what I mean. Perhaps 6 mil is a bit too thin, because my plan is to sort of create a box that's like that. And originally I was going to put a groove in to have a bottom on it, but I think if I do that, it's going to be quite tricky in terms of the table saw, because I was going to groove it out. And if I do groove it out, my only concern is I'm going to have to groove so much into the material that it's going to make the box not very strong. So I can either put a piece on the bottom like so, or just put a piece on the inside. I'll have a little think about what I'm going to do for that, but at least the 3 pieces that have come out are roughly all equally the right size, which is great news. So let's move on to the next stage. Okay, so what I've done now, I've moved the table saw blade over and I've moved it down. It's literally just about half the height of the piece of wood. And as I said, I was going to cut a groove in it to slide a board in. I just want to see if it's possible to do that. So I've got one of these off-cut strips here, one of the ones that's completely the wrong angle. I'll use this one that's sort of wedged at one end. And I'm just going to run that through the table saw and see how that looks, how the groove looks. So let's give it a go. Okay, so it's made the groove, as you can see. The blade needs to come up a tiny bit more than that. I think it's a bit too shallow, so I'll just raise it a mil. Let's try. Okay, so apart from the slip I made, that's a much better cut. I'm not sure if you can see that, but the groove is probably just over halfway. So I just drop it down 1 notch and I think we'll be good to go. Okay, so you can see it's almost thick enough to accept the bottom piece that I'm going to slide in. It's thick enough that end, not quite thick enough that end, so I'll just knock another mil off and run it through once more. Okay, so I've got my two sides, and as you can see, the groove in them is nearly thick enough to fit that in. But at this point, I'm just thinking whether I'm just going to put a normal piece of sort of 8mm maybe board in there and not use the inside bit of this. I've got some spare wood, I've got some other options for those. So I'm just going to mark these up now and let's move on to cutting the ends. So after much thought, I decided to stick to that plan that I've just mentioned, and I got a piece, an offcut of a part of wood I use for my chicken coop build, which is, it's actually quite sturdy, this MDF. It's 8mm MDF, but it looks thicker. It's very rigid, it's not bendy at all, so I cut off a piece that was the same size as my potential bottom of the box size. I then thought about it, that's my thinking face, and I thought actually what it might be quite worth doing is making sure that I've got two pieces, so I can use potentially one from the top and one from the bottom. So I just ran it through. It looked like I was adjusting the size there. I wasn't, I was just making sure it was absolutely level. So I run another piece through, so I had a top and a bottom to the box. So with both of those cut, here I am marking. I'm terrible at doing this. It's something I've really got to get better at. So I've just marked the top and the bottom before I put all the things together, offer them all up together and see whether they were a good fit and whether the actual board that I'd cut fit into the grooves that I've just put into the sides and the top. So at the moment, only 3 pieces of wood you can see, because obviously one of those pieces is going to be cut to form the two ends of the box. But as you can see from this, it was a good fit. If anything, it was slightly too big on one side, not quite sort of big enough on the other, but nothing that a little bit of sanding wouldn't sort out when the box was together. But you can see me there looking at it thinking, is it going to fit, is it going to fit? But it did. It was actually a really, really nice fit, which just left me onto my to the angles next. So the next thing I did was put the box together. First I had to cut the 2 end sections, which I did. And this was, I think we call this officially fettling. Well, that's what I'm going to call it, because I wasn't exactly sure of the sizes at this point. So I put the sizes in, which were the ones that I thought were correct. And then it was just a case of assembling the box, dry assembling it, and seeing. And as you can see from this, obviously the sides aren't mitered yet, I know that, but as you can see, the first attempt, it was just a tiny little bit too long, just on the ends. They weren't sitting right. It was probably only about 5, sort of 8mm, but that was enough for me to take it back to the table saw, and I just chopped off another little bit on the end, so that bit that you can see at the top of the picture there just sank, and it was sort of almost level with the top. So nearly got it there, but then I just popped it back in the table saw, took a little bit off, and it absolutely looked smashing. So the next thing I did was go back to the table saw, and I set a bevel on the blade of 45 degrees. I've never done this before, hence why you can see me taking so long doing it, but it was the first time I've done it. I've seen videos on YouTube on how to do it on my particular table saw, but I just thought this is the time. When you buy a table saw, you need it for this exact reason. That's what it's for. Now, I've left this funny little bit of film in, and you might think, what on earth is that in there for? But I bought a new tripod for my little mini action cam, which is like a rip-off of a GoPro, really. And I'm trying to get better movies or create better videos for my YouTube channel. So as you can see, it looks all very professional, got it all set up, and then it was at this point that I realised that it was knackered. So it wouldn't turn on, it wouldn't turn off, I couldn't get it to work in any way, shape or form. It wasn't very expensive, this camera. It's only about 30 quid, I think, but 30 quid is 30 quid. And I've probably only used it 2 times and it's completely stopped working. And if anyone's watching this and anyone has a GoPro, I'm seriously thinking of splashing out the money and upgrading it. But unfortunately, the camera didn't work. So as you see, I'll remove it in a minute. The next thing I've got, which you can see in my hand there, is an angle measure, a digital angle measurer, which I bought it really cheaply. I think it was on Amazon or Screwfix. Amazon, I think. And it's brilliant. You just literally attach, it's got a magnet, you attach it to the blade, and it's hyper accurate, much more accurate than you would think. And for a little, it was like 8 quid, I think. It was brilliant, well worth getting. So once I got that and I got the blade exactly the right edge, I could then move on and start cutting the miters. I need to give a message out here, public safety message. I only use this table saw the way you're going to see me using it because I'm very confident and I know exactly how my table saw works, saying touching wood. But please be very careful when you're using a table saw because they are incredibly dangerous bits of kit and you can get a really serious injury. So I took off all the miters and then I was ready to move to the next stage, which was to construct the box. So the next stage was the glue up. This actually was pretty straightforward, I'm pleased to say. Well, it was straightforward at this point, but unfortunately things slightly unravelled, as you'll see in a minute. I used a little bit of CA glue, like industrial strength super glue, just to help the joint here, and I actually think that possibly made it worse. Because I got it all together, it looked really good, and then when I went to lift it, it totally fell apart. But I was at least confident that it was a complete right angle. And I'm again using these little clamps here. I know you can get these clamps everywhere, but this little set from Parkside, absolutely brilliant. For cheap clamps, they're really good. But as you can see, they don't help you do any better at gluing. A little bit to learn on gluing, I think, but luckily it stayed. It was rock solid and it got exactly what I wanted it to do. It's at this point you can see a tiny little gap appearing sort of on the left hand side of the box, at the opposite side to the glue out. That's just because I'd shaved a little bit too much off the wood. You can't see it from inside the box, but you can see it from underneath, and actually you're not going to see the underneath, so it's not a big deal. But just slightly cut it incorrectly, so it ended up being slightly on the wrong. It was at this point that I realised there was a big bow on the inside, which was on that edge where I'd cut the wood a bit too short. So it gave me a plan to use a piece of wood that I picked up from B&Q, which was sort of packing on top of the worktop. So I've got this piece of board, and it actually looks very similar to the wood that I used for the box. So I decided to get the plunge saw out, cut a strip off, and take it from there. I then got the strip that I just cut and made a measurement on it. It's face down now, so you can't sort of see the design on it. So I got it down, I got it cut to the size I wanted it to be for the box. This is the inside of the box. So basically it's going to be 2 pieces of wood. One would flush with the top of the box and one would set inside it as sort of to act as the lid to stop the lid sliding off. It's not very easy to explain, you'll see it a bit more in a minute, but the first thing I had to do was get the piece of wood that was cut to the right size that would actually fit in the box and just leave a tiny angle on either side. I then laid out that strip I'd made on my larger strip of wood just to make sure that I had an equal edge. I used my gauge ruler. I'm not quite sure what that thing's called, but I used that to get the exact measurement, get the exact gauge around the inside, front and back, so it was exactly in the right place. And I measured exactly where I needed to cut, and then I took it to the miter saw to take off the excess wood. So when I'd done that and I got it marked up and I put the straight edge on, as I said, I took it over, put it through the miter saw, and luckily this was a very, very easy cut. As I got towards this stage, things seemed to be getting more and more complicated, and I'm sure they were becoming more and more complicated because of the way I was doing it rather than the nature of what I was doing. But when I put it in, I got the cut, and as you can see, the piece of wood matches really, really nicely. So I was then able to take it to the bench. I glued and screwed it. I didn't screw it, sorry, I glued it, and I put in some CA glue and just normal wood glue. And then I put on clamp heaven, as many clamps as I could throw at it. So I left it drying for about an hour or so, and when I came back, I was hoping that it had managed to glue. It should have done, because it had enough clamps that had enough glue, and it had enough time to dry, but particularly at the moment it's very warm, and I didn't know if that would affect the glue one way or the other, but I was pleased to say that the lid absolutely stuck a treat. Perfect. Then it was a time to give it a test fit, and surprise, surprise, to my utter delight, it fitted. It actually looks really good. I'm very impressed, and I was very pleased with how the top seemed to blend in with the bottom. I know you can't see it perfectly there, but it's not a massive difference in colour, and actually I quite like it being slightly two-tone anyway, because it gives it a little bit of character. So the last thing to do was to attach the knob on the top. I'm sure there's a much more technical term for that than knob on the top, but as you can see there, I have got a knob that was left over from a chest of drawer rehab that me and Mrs. B did, and I just thought it would go very well. I did have like a glass one that I tried at first, but it just didn't look right when I placed it on the top, so I left it at that. So with that, with the knob attached, it was actually complete, and I have to say, for the first time I've ever done anything like this, there's quite a lot of new skill involved here. The skill not involved was obviously placing the drill in front of the camera, but you're getting used to that now. Oh, I'm obviously picked it up and moved it. So a lot of skills involved in here, a lot of things I've never done before. I've never mitered, I've never used the angle on the table saw. I haven't made anything as small and sort of dainty as this before, so I was quite pleased with how it turned out. I think if I was giving it a score out of 10, it would be a very solid 7, but if I was doing it again, there were quite a lot of things that I think I could change. Just about the way that I put it together, and obviously having that bowed bit in the middle made it much more difficult than it needed to be. But overall, very happy. It was for Mrs. B. She's very happy too. And the only other thing I think I'm going to do, which I'm not going to do in this video, is I might line the inside with felt just to make it a bit more plusher on the inside. But as I said, overall, I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Thank you very much for watching this week's video from the Garage Workshop, and hopefully you've enjoyed seeing me make the box. I've got loads of great projects coming up, so please subscribe, hit the notification bell. Happy woodworking!